All right, there we go. Hello everyone, how's it going? Team here, and this is BxJS Weekly, episode 110, bringing you all the best JavaScript news of the week in a podcast form. And today we got some pretty cool news here and there, and for whatever reason, as usual, it's not that much articles or tutorials or whatever, but we do have a whole ton of new libraries and demos this week around, so let's get cracking. Hey, not a number is a number. Welcome to the stream. All right, as usual, the first section of the week is getting started. We got 4 articles here today. The first one being Introduction to React Native Maps. If you ever tried React Native, you know that working with maps is a bit annoying because, if you want native maps, then it's going to be a bit of a pain in the ass because you have to find a package that is cross-platform. If you want to use the web maps, they're going to feel a bit sluggish. So React Native Maps is one of those native packages that sort of works on both Android and iOS. And this tutorial shows you how to use it with all the basic setup, essentially, including custom styling and things like this. So if you are diving into React Native and wanted to work with maps, do check this one out. It's a very good tutorial and will get you started with maps in no time. All right. Next thing we got here is how to architect a Node.js project from ground up. By the way, can I just note this? So the Microsoft Edge updated to version 81, and they now have this reader button that makes reading articles a whole lot easier and nicer because it just removes all the garbage from the sites, which is something I absolutely love. Anyhow, going back to the article. So this is an opinionated piece on how to structure your Node.js application. Okay, apparently it does break a bit of code formatting, but that is fine. We can do it like this. So yeah, anyway, as I was saying, so this is opinionated piece on structuring your Node.js app, in this case specifically Express.js app with the server side. It talks about the MVC pattern and how to structure your folders and stuff like this. Again, it's highly opinionated. As I said, it is purely MVC approach, but if you are just getting started with Node.js and if you don't yet have your opinion on how does the folder structure should look, how to structure the models, the views, the controllers, what is the pattern to pick, and so on and so forth, this is actually a really good guide to start with. So if you are just getting started, then do check this one out. It's a really good one. Again, if you already have your own opinion on that, you won't really find anything amazingly new here. It's just your typical MVC with Express, but it is a good starting point. All right, continuing, we got creating a CommonJS-based NPM packages via TypeScript. So this is a pretty nice tutorial for TypeScript and specifically for exporting the CommonJS-based packages from the TypeScript project, which, as far as I understand, is not exactly super trivial, but not really too complicated either. So if you are the person who wants to use TypeScript but want to produce the CommonJS packages, for example, for Node.js, then do check this one out. It actually looks like a really nice tutorial. And I mean, it is from Dr. Axel Rauschmeier, so his stuff is usually top-notch. So yeah, there you go. All right, continuing, the last article we got here in the Getting Started section is the evolution of asynchronous programming in JavaScript, which is a very elaborate title for what I call, for what I would say is basically just a description of different approaches to asynchronous programming in JavaScript. So it does also kind of walk you through how they changed over time, starting from the callbacks, going to promises, going to async await and generators. But it is in the end just a tutorial that shows you, okay, so here's the callbacks, here's how they work, and here's the problems with them. Then the solution is a promise, and then, there's a syntax for promises, and it's quite basic. But again, if you're just starting, that's a really solid article to read through, and you're probably going to pick up a few things from it if you are still learning. Right, that is it for the Getting Started section. Now we are coming to the articles and news. We got 4 of them today. The first one being developing in a Monorepo while still using a Webpack from the Etsy development blog, as far as I understood at least. And yeah, so the gist here is that Etsy, at Etsy they have like a lot of JavaScript, as the blog says, and they use their own build server essentially that asynchronously built and served the assets on demand, right? So since there's a lot of stuff, you don't really want to compile all of it immediately, which could take like quite some time. And they instead built a server build system that basically built that dynamically. And then at some point, they decided to migrate to Webpack, right? And yeah, there's some caveats related to that. So first of all, there's the section bending Webpack to our will. Well, they tried to figure out if they could reproduce essentially the same setup they had with the custom server using Webpack. And turns out, yeah, to some extent you can. And then they had to bend their will to Webpacks because there are some limitations and caveats, as it usually happens. And yeah, they ended up creating Kevin middleware, which is quite amusing name, to be honest, that basically does exactly what they want. So it's an extension of their custom server that essentially hooks into Webpack and then manages different instances of a Webpack to build specific assets and serve them dynamically, which is a very interesting approach. I mean, it makes perfect sense when you think about it if your project is big enough for that. But I don't think I've seen something like this before. It's a very interesting write-up. There's a lot of more in-depth details about that. The Kevin middleware is also open sourced on GitHub if you are curious about that. So if you are working with all of that, do check it out. It's a really interesting write-up. Hey, Mr. Drunix, welcome to the stream. All right, continuing, we got Programming Servo, my own private runtime. So this is, how do I put it? So this is still JavaScript related, but it's not really JavaScript. The article itself is mostly about Rust and using Servo. If you never heard about Servo, it's actually JS engine or VM that is part of the SpiderMonkey, right? And no, wait, it's the other way around. I always confuse this stuff. So yeah, the SpiderMonkey is the VM that is used by Firefox, right? And Servo is a big system written in Rust and does a lot of things. I think the Servo, so SpiderMonkey is a part of Servo. Anyway, you can use Servo to create your own JavaScript and WebAssembly runtimes if you want to. And this article walks you through doing exactly that. So you can use a Servo to embed the web engine, JavaScript and WebAssembly engine into any app you want and use it, for example, as a scripting language, right? Or, I don't know, do something else. So this article is essentially a tutorial, but quite in-depth one that shows you how to take a Servo and use it in your Rust app and then create an event loop, create a JS context, and invoke the JavaScript using Servo, which is, again, it's quite a journey, but it's very interesting. And if you ever wanted to do something like this, do check this one out. It's pretty cool. Again, it might be a bit confusing if you're not familiar with the JavaScript engine internals, I guess, because, it kind of assumes that you know what isolates are, what the contexts are, what is the event loop and stuff like this, because you're going to have to manually instantiate majority of those things. So there we go. Hey, Marina, welcome to the stream. Hey, Andri, welcome to the stream. All right, that is it. So all the source code mentioned in the article, by the way, is open source. So if you just want to check out the project itself, it is available on GitHub, and you can just check out what is going on. Again, it's really interesting to see stuff like this. There is even cooler stuff related to WebAssembly that I'm going to cover as a part of tips, tricks, and bits and autonomous a bit later. But yeah, there we go. All right, continuing, we got, oh yeah, this one. We got a writing an emulator in JavaScript and interfacing with multiple UIs. So first of all, that's a really big article, like a really, really big article. It's a very detailed and very good article. And it talks about writing an emulator for chip 8, which is, that's the thing, right? So, I mean, chip 8, if I remember correctly, that was what was the... Telmac 1800 is the computer that was used in, which I think I've only seen that one in our university in some closed off storage that nobody ever uses anymore. And I'm not even sure it was working. So I never used this one in reality. I know that it exists, but it's a very, very old computer basically, right? And yeah, chip 8 is, well, it's a CPU it uses, right? So you have to write a chip 8 interpreter to actually make the code work in the JavaScript. And this is a tutorial, and it basically walks you one by one, showing you how to write your own emulator for, well, very old and very simple CPU, but still. Oh, or I guess it's not, you probably wouldn't, do you call it a CPU? I think it's basically a chip, not a CPU, right? Where's that wiki? Is it a CPU or is it a chip? Blah, blah, blah. Oh, Chip 8 is actually a programming language. Chip 8 programs run on Chip 8 virtual machine. Blah, blah, blah. So what was the CPU it was running on? Is it still x86 or something? Blah, blah, blah. Okay, you know what, whatever. So Chip 8 is a specific programming language that is made for very old computers, let's put it this way. And yeah, so this teaches you how to create your own Chip 8 interpreter and run some existing apps on it, going from, you know, memory allocation, registers, stacks, pointers, timers, graphical output, key input, CPU emulation, and all that kind of stuff, which is just bonkers. Again, it's a very in-depth article, so if you are interested in stuff like this, absolutely do read through. It's fantastic. If that sounds too hard for you, still read through it, because you will pick up a few very cool things here and there. It's not extremely complex. Okay, it's not extremely complicated, but it is complex. But yeah, it's a fantastic article, so quite highly recommended. Okay, and the last article we got here today is Introducing Crank. So we are going to have a look at the Crank itself as a library a bit later, but this one is, well, it's a write-up from the author of the library that talks about creation of a, well, Crank is a JSX-driven components framework that uses functions, promises, and generators as components. Now it's basically works and you know, kind of designed around the same idea that the React. So when you write a function that basically returns JSX, right, and then you can use that function as a component, which you can render to any DOM node, and then the framework will take care of rendering and updates for you. The difference between React and this is that Crank actually allows you to use async functions and generator functions and async generator functions as the components. So if you would do something like this in React, this won't work, right? So you cannot yield a component, you cannot return a promise that will return a component. It just doesn't work, right? So the author was like, okay, so I'll just try and make a React-like framework that would actually allow me to just await fetch data and then render that on a screen, which is, again, you know, React has the Suspense API that's been coming for, I think they announced it a year and a half ago or something. There's been quite some time already, and it's still coming. There's still like still some time until it probably is shipped. But yeah, until we have Suspense API, you can't really work with it in a straightforward. I mean, okay, with hooks it's a bit easier, but still there's like, you know, there's some annoying points to that essentially. But yeah, it's a very interesting project, and I'm curious to see how that will develop, right? Because I'm also interested to see how easy the Suspense API will be to use when they stabilize it, because so far they've been changing it quite a bit, and there's been, like, it's not the most straightforward API, right? I mean, I guess it's not really intended for the end user, and it's probably going to be some abstractions like hooks or something to simplify that. But yeah, it can be quite annoying. But anyway, it's a very interesting project. There is solid reasoning in this article basically to why he decided to do that. There's some also deep dives into, you know, why React doesn't do that, for example. So if you are curious, do check out the article. It's a pretty nice write-up. And yeah, there we go. Let me have a look at the chat. Confused with those generator thing. I mean, the generators are very nice tool, but you very rarely need them. Like it's almost, if you have a sync await, majority of time you're good. I don't think I had even one case when I would use the generators so far, but yeah. You should try watch Crank 1 and 2 movie. Okay, I don't remember if I watched, I think I watched them, but anyway. Check out Pony Codes. It's okay, let me, okay, I will open that and we will check this out after. Quick and easy JavaScript unit testing. Okay, I will, thank you for sharing the link. I will check it out after we are done with the current episode. Anyway, continuing, we got tips, tricks, and bit-sized awesomeness. So we got a few things here that are pretty cool. So the first one is announcement from Eddie Osmani. So ResizeObserver, that is a very handy little API, is finally supported by all modern browsers. Yes, Safari finally shipped the damn thing. So you can now actually use it without any polyfills or anything like this. So yes, yay to Safari finally doing, adding support for ResizeObserver. Hey Shubham, welcome to the stream. So yes, if you needed ResizeObserver but were still, locked by Safari support, well, now you can just use it without any polyfills, considering your users use actually the latest Safari, which might be the problem. But yeah, it's now in WebKit, so it's very nice to have it released finally, and very nice to have some consistency across browsers, I guess. Next release we got, next tiny cool thing we got here is what I was talking about before. So it's an announcement from Microsoft open source blog, and it's not what you typically expect, first of all, from Microsoft, and second of all, from the containers world, because it's a bit different. So here's the deal. They announced the WebAssembly for Kubernetes. Now, what that actually means is, I don't know how much you guys know about Kubernetes, but the idea is that Kubernetes is just the thing that manages your container runtime, right? And majority of time, that container runtime is Docker. So you typically have the Docker containers running on machines, and then the Kubernetes that just manages them and allows you to do all kind of crazy things with them, right? But the thing is that the Kubernetes is not limited to Docker as a container engine, and you can spawn different kubelets even with different engines across the same Kubernetes cluster, right? So what the Microsoft people did here in, I believe this is the Azure team, I'm guessing, yeah, the Azure application platform. So what they did is they released a Krustlet, which is a kubelet engine that allows you to run WebAssembly modules as separate, isolated instances within Kubernetes. Like, the thing is right now with, Kubernetes, the WebAssembly being in its infancy, it's a bit, on one hand, it's really cool to see something like this. On the other hand, I cannot imagine what would you run within those, because the APIs are extremely limited. You don't even have like stuff like SIMD, and the VASI is still in, in its infancy. But the idea of having essentially isolated WASM modules running instead of containers, just imagine how little overhead those things have. And it's just the idea of having something like this, the WASM replacing the Docker containers, is, for whatever reason, is incredibly exciting to me. I don't know about you, but that just seems like such a cool area. Again, this is probably not something we're going to be using in production in the next couple of years. Maybe in 2-3 years, it's going to mature enough to allow us to replace the Docker, but a really cool experiment. So if you are curious, do check it out. The Krustlet project is open source and available on GitHub, which is also cool. It's also written in Rust. So that means, you can actually fork it and use it for your own purposes. If you want to run tiny WebAssembly modules using this runtime, you can do that. Obviously, it's not really what it was made for, but nonetheless, I think it's a really cool experiment. And I am, again, as I already said multiple times, I'm pretty excited to see where WebAssembly goes from now on. All right, next thing we got here is a small PSA. So the Firefox 75 was released, and they've actually added a new scheduled task that collects telemetry about your operating system. And the task is opt out. So it's on by default, and you have to explicitly turn it off if you don't want Mozilla running a scheduled task that runs outside of the browser and collects data about your system. They are really open about what it does and what it collects. So there's like a schema and data they collect right now. For the moment, it's just your default browser settings. So, if you're okay with that, then it's fine. If you're not okay with some things running outside of your browser, which, in my opinion, that just shouldn't be, you can opt out. They describe the way to do that. And you can also shut down the task forcibly through the Windows scheduler, for example. So just be warned that thing exists. And that was a complete surprise to me, because they did not mention that in the release notes themselves, as far as I remember, which was a bit annoying. But yeah, so that's the thing. Hey, Mr. Isabel, welcome to the stream. All right, continuing, we got another announcement from Microsoft team. This time around, it is from Visual Studio team. This is a really cool initiative that's called Bring Your Own Machine to Visual Studio Online. So they released the VS Online to general availability sometime last year, if I remember correctly. And, you had to basically get the Azure instance for it to work, which was, I guess, fine for some people, but annoying for others. But the cool thing is that now you can actually bring your own machine to it. So the idea is that you install the specific VS Online command line, and then you register your current machine as the self-hosted environment. And then you can connect to that machine either from VS Code Online or from your local VS Code installation on another machine, right? This is the cool bit. So you can actually have your development environment set up on, I don't know, local home server or whatever that is in your basement, and then just remotely connect to it either from the browser or from the VS Code and just code on it as if you were doing that locally. I'm not sure how exactly it works with, X11, for example. I imagine it probably doesn't, but, or maybe you could probably tunnel it over SSH or something, but it's really cool. Like, it's amazing how you can literally do that in like 3 or 4 commands, which is just bonkers. So yeah, if you're interested, again, it's available right now. You can just install it, download, and try it out. I believe it's also open source, at least the command line interface itself. Here's a question. So they do have like links to GitHub repos here and there. Yes, online. Okay, yeah. So it's at least partially open source, which is also kind of cool. Right, and the last announcement we got here today is from GitHub. GitHub has just made all the features for teams free. So if you had a team before, you had to pay $9 per month per user for having the basic features like private repos and CI/CD and a bunch of other stuff, right? Well, now the basic tier is free, and the more expensive tier is just $4 per user per month, which is pretty much matching what GitLab has offered before on gitlab.com, which is awesome news, to be honest. Like, we just basically saved a ton of money by downgrading our current GitHub team to a cheaper plan, because it doesn't make sense for us to pay for all of that, when we can pay like half as much for better features. So if you are using GitHub for Teams, do check this one out. Maybe you can downgrade. Maybe you can even go free if there's enough like CI/CD and package limits for you. It's really cool. So there we go. All right, that is it for tips, tricks, and bit-sized awesomeness. Now we're coming to the releases section. We got 4 of them today. The first one being Node version 13.13. That adds a new function, fs read v, that is basically takes an array of array buffer view elements and write the data and reads it sequentially to the buffers. Honestly, have no idea why would I need that. I mean, I'm not really working with files that much, and when I do, it's either just stream them into the memory and then parse JSON or whatever and throw them into the database, or write to file. And I don't really have this sophisticated cases that would require something like this, but if you do check this one out. And there's a new overload for fs readsync that allows you to optionally pass any offset length and position parameters, so you can basically read stuff at arbitrary offset length and positions, which is always kind of nice. So there you go. There's a bunch of other changes which are not as significant, and I guess the other significant one is that the maximum HTTP header size was changed from 8 kilobyte to 16 kilobyte, which is, I don't think I ever hit the limit for HTTP header size, but maybe if you are doing a lot of heavy lifting and that's a lot of stuff into headers, that's a good thing to have. But yeah, that's about it. Next release we got here is Cypress version 4.40, which fixes a bunch of bugs, and the major highlight here is it now supports TypeScript for test files out of the box. You don't even have to set anything up. You can just write your end-to-end test cases in TypeScript and they will work out of the box, which is kind of neat. So if you're using TypeScript, do check this one out. Next release we got here is Puppeteer version 3.0, which, so first of all, it upgrades to Chromium 81 out of the box, the latest one. Second of all, Puppeteer can now fetch a Firefox nightly binary for you and control the Firefox out of the box. So you don't have to change anything. You don't have to configure anything specifically. Just pass it additional variable that says, okay, Puppeteer product Firefox, and Puppeteer will start working with Firefox out of the box with exactly the same API, which is kind of cool. Bear in mind, the new version dumps the Node version 8 support, but then again, if you are living in LTS, you should have been migrated to Node 12 for quite some time now, so this is probably fine. All right, and the last release we got here today is Vue.js version 3.0 beta 1. Unfortunately, there is not that, there's no changelog or anything like that. There are official write-ups about that out there if you want to go and find them, but for whatever reason, they are not referenced in the documentation here. But basically, Vue.js version 3 is now in beta, which means we're going to see the release soon-ish. So yeah, it's actually kind of great. I'm quite interested to see how the version 3 will look once it's released, and I would be very interested to trying it out and seeing how much it changed, because I remember a lot of people were really unhappy about the whole hooks changes they've implemented. But there we go. Right, that's it for the releases. Now we're coming to the libraries and demos, and yes, we do have a whole ton of them today, and some of them are pretty damn cool. So let me just open all of that first, and then we are gonna go through them one by one. So the first thing we got here for today is Hegel, Advanced Static Type Checker for JavaScript. That is, it seems like it's an attempt of doing a flow better than it was, and in a more seamless way with stricter type checking and better predictions of where the errors would happen. Yeah, I'm not the guy who's really into static type checking. It's nice to have TypeScript that can basically warn you about stuff on existing JavaScript, but I'm not even using TypeScript that much. Maybe I should start to, but I don't know. I'm still not convinced, to be honest. But if you are doing static type checking, and if you are not happy with TypeScript and not happy with Flow, do check this one out. Maybe this is exactly what you wanted. It actually has quite a few cool things that basically does this in-depth heuristics where it tries to predict something that is basically not strictly described, which, I can see where it could be very useful, but again, not my cup of tea, but maybe it is yours, so do check this one out. It is pretty cool. All right, next thing we got here is eta or eta. I'm not sure how to read that correctly. I guess it's eta, right? Because it's the Greek letter. It's a lightweight, powerful, pluggable, embedded JS template engine. Yes, you heard that right. It's a EJS alternative, essentially, for all intents and purposes. It is very tiny. It's just 2.2 kilobytes gzipped, and it looks a lot like EJS, to be honest. It just seems to be a modern version of EJS. So if you are looking for an embeddable JavaScript template engine that also supports plugins and stuff, then do check this one out. Maybe this is what you wanted. Honestly, after trying JSX, I'm not sure why would I want anything like that. But maybe you do, so there we go. All right, next thing we got here is css-doodle, web component for drawing patterns with CSS. This one is really cool. I don't know why would I use that, but I've spent, I think, half an hour just refreshing the page and seeing different patterns here, because every time you refresh it, you get a new thing, and you can literally just do that, and it's it works, and it's amazing, and you can actually do different cool things with that and see results immediately. So I'm terrible at CSS, but even I spent, as I said, about half an hour just playing around with that stuff and seeing what will happen if I do that. So there you go. Hey Luigi, welcome to the stream. So if you ever wanted to, doodle stuff with CSS, do check this one out. It's actually really cool, and they have a lot of examples that you can play with, and it's really nice. It's a really well-made project. Okay, continuing, we got vscode-crossnote extension. It's still work in progress, bear in mind, but I think it's really promising. So once this ships and once they integrate it with the VS Code sync, I think it could be a really neat feature. So essentially, it turns a VS Code into a markdown note-taking platform using the extension. So it's got this sidebar thing that essentially allows you to take notes in markdown and then edit them, toggle them, whatever, which looks pretty neat. So this is kind of the feature I would probably use if it would sync the notes across my computers. So that will be like one of the things that I will be interested to see. But yeah, I heard that version 4 will be using TypeScript. Oh, it's the jQuery. jQuery 3. Yeah, I've seen that the jQuery 3.5 was out a few days ago, but I don't think there's anything significant in there. I try to cover the releases that basically include something that is, you know, contains any significant changes, and 3.5 seems to be like, hey, we just fixed some stuff and updated some stuff, and what is going on with my browser? There we go. Where is the changelog? 3.5. Wait a second. Changelog changes. Exactly. So it was like, hey, we got like a bunch of bug fixes, which is great. Don't get me wrong. I mean, jQuery is still a very nice library to use, but I don't see any reason to cover a release that just have like, hey, we fixed bugs and deprecated a bunch of methods, which I mean, I guess it's great, but I'm probably going to cover jQuery 4 once it's out, because it seems like they're going to have quite a bunch of new cool things. But yeah. Anyway, continuing with the libraries, we got prerender.js. So this is pages, pre-rendering, prefetching for your website. Works in the same way that instant page that I covered quite some time ago. Essentially, whenever the user hovers over the link, it triggers the preload in the background, so that whenever the user clicks on it, the page has already started loading, so it's a lot snappier. Again, works more or less the same way as instant page, and it seems fine. You know, if you need that, do check this one out. It's again, it's not exactly super complex thing to have. All right, continuing, we got Rendezvous. So this is, I guess it's more of a learning material. So essentially, it's an app that merges together Twilio, what is it, Jitsi, and it is the SendGrid. What was the another thing? There was another app that they used. Jitsi, SendGrid, MVP CSS for CSS. Oh yeah, hegel.js is what was they used for the protection. Essentially, sort of the meeting platform where you can just chat with someone using Jitsi, which, you know, I mean, it's as I said, it's a good learning material, but probably not something you would use on a daily basis, at least in the current state. All right. Continuing, we got Philia, a reactive Slack application framework. So that's a pretty neat one. Essentially allows you to create Slack components, or Slack, what do you call them actually? Slack applications, I guess, right? That have interactive elements and build that in sort of a React way, which actually looks really neat. So last time I tried to create an interactive Slack component thingy that does this, that was not a nice experience. Like, Slack SDK is not the worst one out there, but some of the things are, well, very rough around the edges. Doing it this way seems super cool. So it's like literally just write JSX, and then the framework does it for you and renders it into the Slack message itself, which is pretty damn cool, to be honest. So if you're working with Slack, make sure to check this one out. Maybe this will save you some time. Okay. Next thing we got here is Parasite. So this is a tool. It's a middleware that you plug into your service, be it Node.js or a native one. I believe it is still running on nodes, but you can sort of intercept the requests. So the way it works is that you plug into your web app as a middleware, and it will, where was the screenshot? They had a screenshot somewhere. Come on, I know that you had a screenshot somewhere here. There we go. So essentially what it does is that it will collect all the requests that come to your app and all the responses that your app sends back and allow you to replay them. So it's a very narrow use case, but it can be extremely useful for debugging and figuring out what went wrong with your app. Again, this is sort of aimed to be a debugging tool, so, you know, don't run it in production. But it might be incredibly helpful if you're having some problems with, you know, weird responses, weird requests, and stuff like this. Looks quite nice, relatively easy to set up with something like Express, just a basic middleware, and yeah, seems pretty handy. So there we go. All right, next thing we got here is pwa-auth, a web component that lets you sign in, sign up, lets the users sign in and sign up using their Microsoft, Google, or Facebook accounts. And yeah, essentially it's just a simple web component where you create this one tag, pass them the Microsoft, Google, and Facebook keys, and then the user can sign in using this one button. Few caveats: it uses some of the unstable APIs, so you might. I mean, it still falls back to the old good pop-ups that are when that unstable API is not supported. Like for example, in Firefox, it's still behind the flags. It does fall back correctly, but just keep in mind that it might break, and just make sure to update it if you decide to use it. It does use this new fancy credentials API that is supported in Google Chrome that allows you to do basically stuff like this, which essentially asks you with which account do you want to log in, and will save the credentials and autofill them, which is a pretty neat feature. But that feature, again, it's a bit annoying because this feature means you have to save your account within the browser itself. So if you use like a password manager, that won't work, which is mildly annoying, but anyway. So it's a login component, which looks pretty nice. So there you go. Do check it out if that sounds interesting. All right, next thing we got here is Crank. So this is the JSX-driven components with async and generator support that we were talking before. There's a bunch of examples here. Uses JSX Pragma, as I said before, and allows you to render either generator components or async components as is, basically, right? So the cool thing is that, yes, since the components are async, you can actually just do that. So you can literally say, okay, await fetch, await JSON, and then render that JSON in the body, which is kind of cool. I am still not sure how would you do loading in that case. I mean, I guess you can do loading indicator with the generators in this case, but that just feels a bit, cluttersome, I guess. But anyway, it's an interesting project, so do check this one out. That sounds interesting. Okay, continuing, we got Meanderer, JavaScript microlibrary for responsive CSS motion path. Something I never thought about. So if you didn't know, you can do motion path in CSS for animations, mostly used in SVGs as far as I understand, right? The problem with it, as it turns out, is that it doesn't actually scale with, it's not really responsive. So in normal case, that would actually break the animation, but this library allows you to scale them correctly, which is, again, something I did not know needed to happen, but apparently it does. So if you're working with SVGs and animations, do check this one out. Seems like it can save you quite a bit of time. Yeah, that's basically all it does. All right, next thing we got here is react-tater, a React component to add annotations to any element on the page, which, in the demo actually adds potatoes, like literally. There you go. You have like a ton of potatoes. For whatever reason, all of them are expanded. Oh, that was the last ones that I've added. Okay, that's my fault for having so many of them. But yeah, you can essentially, add the different emoji or whatever, pin them, drag them around, and this is basically what it does. And yeah, it seems like a very nice React component. So if you needed something like this, do check this one out. Continuing, we got Thwack, a tiny modern data fetching solution. So this is essentially an alternative to, or I guess wrapper for fetch, that has Axios-like interface and only weighs 1.5 kilobytes gzipped. Obviously, it won't have all the Axios features, but if you needed a very lightweight alternative with similar-ish API and some features of Axios, do check this one out. It actually looks like a really nice thing. Okay, next thing we got here is mdjs-viewer. So this one is really cool. I really hope that we could get something like this integrated into GitHub itself at one point. So it's a Markdown JavaScript viewer Chrome extension. What that means is when you have Markdown in your GitHub repo and you have some JavaScript code for client-side components there, you can click a Show Demo button on the README that will render the code example dynamically as a proper working thing that you can actually interact with. It uses the unpkg to fetch the modules, so it has to be the client-side modules, obviously, and they have to be ES modules so that you can dynamically do all of that. But it's a really cool idea, and man, I would love to see that as a part of GitHub itself, where you could actually, just click on a button and see the preview of like demo card in this case or whatever, which I think is a really cool idea. So instead of like seeing the code, you would actually see the live previews and the code. So yeah, if that sounds interesting, do check it out. Again, for now, it's just a Chrome extension, but we'll see how that develops. Okay, continuing, we got event reduce, an algorithm to optimize database queries that run multiple times. So yeah, it's sort of, again, very limited use case, but a pretty neat idea. The sort of the algorithm that basically, heuristics algorithm that reasons over your old query results plus new events, trying to figure out if it can produce a new results without actually running the query against the database. As I said, very limited use cases, unless there's a set of conditions met, it's not going to work at all. For example, you need predictable sort order, and there's a bunch of other things. You cannot do like relational queries or queries that run across multiple tables collections and things like this. But if your case fits it, it can provide quite an improvement. So they have a demo here, and I found another cool library out of that. But we're going to talk about that in a second. And they have a demo that basically runs the bunch of events over the collection with and without it. And it gives quite some savings. So it's like 93% of queries optimized. And that is pretty damn impressive, to be honest. So if you're working a lot with similar-ish queries and you might be able to reduce the execution if you sort of save the old results and reason over them, do check this one out. It's actually a pretty damn interesting idea. All right. And this is the library that I picked up from their demo that I never knew about before. It's called MiniMongo, and it's a client-side in-memory MongoDB backed by local storage with server sync over HTTP. A thing I never knew existed until I discovered it, and now I just like it sounds really like a really cool thing. So essentially, it allows you to run in-memory version of MongoDB in your browser and then sync it seamlessly with your backend, which I guess if you have a GraphQL, it doesn't really matter, but for prototyping and for different tests, that seems like a perfect thing to have. So there we go. Right, next thing we got here is Falcon, a free open source SQL client for Windows and Mac. So this one is based on Electron and allows you to run SQL queries and also do a pretty nice table and chart and export views of the data, which seems pretty cool. So if you are looking for something like this, do check this one out. Let me have a look at the chat. Like Couchbase. Well, Couchbase is also nice, but I mean, it only works with the Couchbase, right? So this one is sort of the Mongo equivalent of it, which is, yeah, pretty much like a Couchbase for MongoDB. Okay, continuing, we got Redaxios from Mr. Develop It. Another Axios API alternatives, but only 800 bytes. So this is like twice smaller than the previous one. But again, it's just a subset of Axios. Obviously, it doesn't support all the features. And yeah, it essentially has exactly the same API, which is pretty damn cool. So again, if you're using Axios and using only some features of it, consider switching to this because it's only 800 bytes and maybe it does exactly all that you wanted. Right, continuing, we got Opaline or Opaline. I'm not exactly sure how to read that correctly, but it's a Next.js for command line interface tools. It essentially allows you to create CLI tools by, well, just creating files in subfolders and exporting functions, which makes perfect sense. It seems like, using that, you could create a command line tools in a lot nicer way than if you would do it manually. I think I already seen something very similar a few months ago, but yeah, it looks like a very nice framework. So if you're curious, do check this one out. Hey Safik, welcome to the stream. All right, continuing, we got another library from Mr. Develop It. It's called WebWorker, and it's essentially an abstraction over the worker threads in Node.js that makes the web workers consistent across both platforms. So if you're using the web worker in the browser, it's going to behave as, well, the web worker, the proper worker in the browser. And if you're using it in Node.js, it's basically going to adapt the worker threads to behave the same way that the worker does in the browser, which can be pretty helpful to having isomorphic workers, essentially. So if you are using those, do check this one out. It might be quite helpful. Okay, next thing we got here is MailTime, bulletproof email queue on top of NodeMailer with support for multiple clusters and server setups. Yeah, just, the description says it all. So if you are working with emailing and you need to send a lot of stuff and you need a queue and you need a cross-server support and clustering and all that kind of crazy stuff, do check this one out. It actually seems to be pretty nicely made and yeah, maybe helpful to you. All right, next thing we got here is not strictly JavaScript, but you can use it from JavaScript. So it's a go-webauthn-js. It's a JavaScript WebAuthn server library that is compiled from Go. So yeah, the original thing is written in Golang and compiled to WebAssembly and then wrapped in JavaScript so you can actually use it. And there is an example. Where was the example? There was there was a live example somewhere. Was it this one? That was like 25. There we go. So yeah, you can, as you can see here, already registered. So it actually shows you your public key, your authenticator, all this kind of stuff that WebAuthn does, and my display name. So I can actually log in with test and it will ask me for my credentials and the login success. No, I already pressed login and the login failed. Okay, it actually deauthorized me. But WebAuthn is a really cool technology. So there you go. If you wanted to try it out and play around with it and maybe use the Go version of it, which I think there should be a native JavaScript version of it as well, but nonetheless, this thing exists. So if you are curious, do check it out. Right, and the last thing we got in libs and demos for today is lazy npm. So it's a terminal UI for npm. So if you are too lazy to type commands with your hands, you can just use this thing and do it in a sort of interactive visual manner. Seems relatively nice. I still prefer the command line, but maybe you do prefer things like this. It catches your scripts, lists your dependencies, packages, and allows you to run commands in the main window essentially to see what is going on, which seems kind of nice, but I still like my command line more. All right. Well, that's it for the libs and demos, and that's actually it for the episode. Now let's have a look at the pony codes that were shared in the chat. Proud partner of GitHub satellites. Why don't you unit test? Unit tests are not exactly as helpful as integration tests, but that's just my opinion. So what is this thing? Product team, easy and smooth, blah, blah, blah. Okay, is that thing open source or is that some paid service? Because if it's a paid service, then I'm immediately not interested. And if it's not open source, I'm not interested either. Get started. Let's see. No thing. Okay, so it seems like it's a software as a service and it create, visualize your unit test in a few clicks. A straightforward AI-powered interface. No, thank you. I'm good. Unless I control the thing, I'm not going to trust it to run my tests. I know it's probably bad coming from someone who does who worked on machine learning and AI for the past whatever years, but I don't trust it. I want to see the source code. Okay. Yeah, that's actually it from my side, guys. So if you have any questions, suggestions, libraries you want to share, your own projects you want to share, feel free to throw them into the chat right now. If not, then we can just wrap it up here. As usual, you can find all the mentioned links on GitHub or on bxjs.dev once it updates tonight, I believe. You can join our Discord server if you want to talk about any of that after the stream, or you just have any questions about JavaScript, you want some help. I'm almost always there, always happy to help. And yeah, we got a Telegram channel where I collect all the links. So if you're curious about all the stuff that I gather over the week, feel free to join and just read from them. Again, they're unfiltered, so there might be some garbage that I throw out over time, or some articles that I don't think are good enough. And what else is there? Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter if you want. I typically retweet quite a lot of stuff and sometimes shit post about other things. And that's basically it. Let me have a look in the chat. I noticed React Native uses different JS engine. Didn't the Facebook created their own, what was it? Hermes, I think, right? Facebook. Was it Hermes? They created their own integrated version of JavaScript engine. What was it? Facebook, JS. Wait a second. JS engine. There was like, yeah, it was Hermes. Okay, so I just didn't find it. So basically the thing is that the React Native works in a very specific way, so they don't actually need the whole engine, right? And they could optimize for specific React Native cases. That's why there was a whole talk from them, and I think I covered it in one of the podcasts. So they ended up creating their own JavaScript engine only for Android, unfortunately, because iOS does not allow you to run your own engines, which is absolute bullshit, but whatever. But it's a really cool, like, if you're interested, find their talk, find their articles. There's some really fascinating stuff in there. Like, it's absolutely really cool work, and it's really awesome. What do you mean by trusted? Is there anything you can share about it? What do you mean? You mean about the about, like, you know, I'm very of allowing third-party services to have full access to my GitHub accounts in general. And if your demo says, hey, I want full access to your accounts to demonstrate you how our stuff works on your free and open source repositories, I'm not going to click that. I'm just not. I mean, I don't like. I'm fine with my Jest for unit testing and integration testing and Cypress for. Look at Cypress. It's like, it's an open source tool, right? It's end-to-end test tool. It's open source. It's free, but they provide paid services. This is how you do it. Like, this is exactly like, they have this pricing section, and if you want full support or hosted services or whatever, you can buy it from them. If you don't want to set it up yourself, you can just buy it from them, and this is perfect. If you want to set it up yourself, you go ahead to their repo, you fork it, you use the open source version, it works perfectly fine. This is the business model I can get behind. When you just say, hey, we have magic AI that does something to your GitHub account, so grant us permissions, I'm not going to click on that, I'm sorry. Okay, let me have a look at the chat. Have a nice day and stay safe, everyone. Yeah, Mandaputra, have a nice day as well, man. Thank you for joining the stream. Again, stay safe. You know, the whole pandemic is far from being over, but there we go. Tim, plan to feature user projects, like collect some user projects. You can go through them on stream. Malav, I tried to do that at one point, and I did a shout out in Discord chat asking for people to share their projects, but nobody actually replied. So we could try that again. I think I probably should release another YouTube video asking for the projects and then do a live stream where I just do a like public code review or whatever. We could do that. I wanted to do that for like a year now, I guess, but for whatever reason, nobody ever sent me their projects. But yeah, I guess I'll just do a video. Seems like quite a few people are interested, but maybe you are guys just not on the Discord or haven't seen my messages. So let's do that. I'll do a recording that will basically be a call for projects, and people will submit them, and we're just going to do a live stream and go through that and see it. Okay, let me see. Did you check out Prisma? Not yet. It is in my plans. It looks very cool, but I haven't had time to do that yet. I'm probably going to do that on stream at some point. So this is probably how it's going to end up. Maybe next week as well. So let's see what the Wednesday brings. What do you use usually for DB, Mongo, or relational? That depends on the project. So I use both. But if the project seems like the MongoDB would be a better fit, I will use Mongo. If it's obvious that the relational DB would be better, I use like Postgres or whatever. And if there is, if I can see, that we're gonna need something like RDF, then obviously I'm gonna use a GraphDB for it or whatever. So I'm not locking myself to one DB. I mean, it's the same with any tool. I typically tend to not say that I'm just gonna use this one tool and nothing ever, nothing different ever. I usually pick the tools based on the task and based on what is need to be achieved and what is gonna be the fastest, cheapest way of doing that. We can do that. Okay, cool. So I guess I'll just do the video call for projects today or tomorrow, like a really short one, a couple of minutes, just posting it on YouTube so everyone could see, because apparently a lot of people don't read the Discord chat. just chill out there, and I think we have like 500 people in the Discord or something, and I believe we have like maybe 20 active at most. I guess most of people just like idle there, but you know what, it's perfectly fine. So I'll just do the video call for projects, and then we can do a live code review and see how that goes. And yeah. All right. Any more questions, suggestions, anything you guys want to discuss? If not, then let's just wrap it up here. I'm going to go have something to eat, and gonna go play some video games because that sounds like a good pastime, right? And specifically in isolation. Self-isolation is working out really good here. Okay, I'll give you a couple of minutes. Meanwhile, as I said, did I mention all? Oh yeah, one thing I keep forgetting to mention is that we actually have BxJS as a podcast. So if you're not interested in seeing what's going on the screen, you can just listen it as a podcast that I post on Anchor FM every, well, Saturday basically. After this is all done, I just download the file, convert it to sound and post it on there. And yeah, I think that's basically covers it. So there we go. All right, doesn't seem like there's any more questions or suggestions. So thank you guys very much for watching. Thank you for your continued support. I hope you enjoyed the show and maybe even learned something. Again, join our Discord to continue the discussion there. Have an awesome rest of the weekend or rest of the week if you're watching the VOD of this. And I see you next time.